All right. So the screen I just brought up is what the Google Drive looks like from my end. It's going to look very similar from your end as well. Right now, it's just going to give me some additional editing permissions that, as Brian was alluding to, you'll have to make a copy of the documents to do some of the edits that you're going to see are possible from my end. But as you'll see from looking at this shared drive folder, we have folders for both nominating and voting classes and voting only classes. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the nominating and voting classes. And you'll see that within that folder, we have individual folders for each lesson that we have in our Kid Governor Toolkit. So all 15 lessons are listed here with their individual folders. So I'm going to go ahead and open up lesson number 2 here first. And under lesson number 2, you can see that each lesson has all these different types of resources that are going to be available. So we've got a folder for the PDF versions of the worksheets, a folder for the Google Forms version, another folder for the Google Slides version, a fourth folder for the Bitmoji Classroom, which some of the lessons are going to have, and then a fifth folder that's going to have additional activities and resources. So Brian had talked a little bit about Flipgrid earlier. We're thinking we might be able to get a link to Flipgrid in there. And we're working on other kind of video content and resources that will likely go into that folder. So what I'm going to do first is I'll open up the PDF version folder so we can take a look at what those are going to look like on your end. And you'll see that each page of the worksheet that applies to that lesson is in here, and it's labeled with the page number first. And that'll just make it so that the lesson sheets are in the correct order. And it also makes it easier if you have the PDF version or a printed out version of the full toolkit. You can easily reference back and forth between the worksheets here and the full toolkit with the page numbers. So you'll see that you have kind of the lesson plan here, the outline of the lesson, the worksheets that are included. So here we have a diagram that you can share with your students via email or through Google Classroom. You can print it out if you're in the classroom. So it just kind of makes it easier to break these things down into smaller bits. And then kind of the actual worksheets in here as well. So that's what the PDFs will look like. And again, they're broken down into these small pieces to make them a little bit easier to share, especially in a virtual environment. So heading back into the lesson number 2 folder here, I'm now going to open up the Google Forms version of the worksheets. And when I open it on my end, you'll see that I can edit these questions a little bit. And once you've made a copy of it, and I'll show you how to make a copy in just a minute, you can also edit the forms so that they make sense for your classroom. So you'll see, again, we have everything in here that we have kind of in the toolkits and in the PDF versions. So you'll get the diagrams here and questions that students can fill out. So we've got multiple choice style questions here. This makes it easy to share it with your students and for them to fill it out in a way that I think everybody is pretty familiar with at this point, this kind of online form survey style where it's pretty intuitive. And so like I said, if you decided you wanted to edit this, like let's say you didn't want to offer the exit ticket, it's easy enough to edit it from your end. You can just go in here, delete the section, and then your students wouldn't get that question. So it allows you to modify it a little bit for your students and what works best for your classroom. And while I'm in the editing side of this, Brian had talked about making it into a quiz. And I think that's a really kind of cool tool that I'm sure you're all very familiar with already at this point. But if you did want to turn these forms into a quiz, you just go up to the settings icon up here, and you'll see that all the way to the right here, there's a quizzes button. And then you can just click make this a quiz. You have to make sure you hit save up here. I've forgotten to do that before, so you hit save. And then it allows you to kind of modify the questions again so that you can set correct answers. So for example, our first question here is the governor has plans for the state, but needs to tell the citizens about the plans. What can the governor do? So you would click on the question to edit it, click answer key, and then I can say that if the governor wants to communicate plans to the state, he would do that by delivering a speech to citizens. So when you click done, it now registers this as the correct answer to this question. So again, I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with quizzes at this point, but it's just a quick overview of how the quizzes function works here. So I'm going to hop back out to the lesson 2 folder. I'm going to go on to the next folder here, and I'll come back to how to make a copy to your personal drive a little bit later. The third folder is the Google Slides version of worksheets. And I think for some teachers, this is going to be what you might prefer, because this really brings in the kind of aesthetic value of a worksheet. I'll show you what I mean here, where I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. Scrolling isn't working very well. Here we go. So it'll bring up the worksheet in a fillable format. So you'll be able to see the question here. The governor has plans for the state, but needs to tell the citizens about the plans. What can the governor do? And students will be able to fill in their answers right into this text box here. So where it says type here, the governor can give a speech. So they can just fill out the answers right here. And as Brian said, if you assign this to your students through Google Classrooms, you'll get a copy of their responses as they're working on it. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that so I don't forget to do that later. And once again, kind of hopping back out here to the lessons. I'm not going to open the Bitmoji Classroom one yet because Samantha is going to get into that after I'm done. So I won't steal her thunder by giving a preview of that. And right now we don't have anything in the additional activities and resources folder, but we'll be moving stuff into there soon. So that gives you a sense of the overview of just the structure of these folders. And as I said, I want to make sure that I show how to copy these to your shared drive. So, or to your personal drive rather. So in a few weeks, probably early to mid-September, we'll be sharing out these Google Drives to teachers so that you can have access to all these materials. And once you do that in your drive, I'm going to go to my personal drive here for a second. I've already given myself access to it. You can click on Shared Drives over here on the left. And you'll see that I have access to this Connecticut's Kid Governor 2020-21 Toolkits and Resources. So go ahead and open that. And again, it's the same file structure. So you'll be seeing what I was just showing you before, except that when you get to your first form here, or any of the documents for that matter, if I try to open this up, it gets stubborn and tries to open it as my other drive here sometimes. So I'm switch this back to my personal drive. Okay, so you'll see that when you open it on your end, it does not give you the option to edit any of the questions. It kind of shows you in presentation view. And that's because we're trying to encourage people to create copies of this document so that we're not receiving private student information. So you've got to make a copy of it to share with your students. So what you would do instead of just opening it up directly is you would right click on the file here. It's going to give you the option down here to make a copy. And as soon as you click that, you'll see down here it says it's creating the copy. And then you can click on that link and it'll show you in your personal drive where it is. So it's now created a copy of lesson number 2. It's in my personal drive. And now when I go to open it, it shows that I can edit it. So again, you'll have editing permission so you can take questions out, add questions in, and share it with your students. So that's just kind of a overview of how to make copies of these documents so that you can share it out with your students.